Welcome to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast, featuring in-depth interviews with a wide range of music personalities, from rock and roll Hall of Famers to Grammy winners and today's rising stars. Recorded from the old Rock House in St. Louis, Missouri, here's your host, Aaron Perlut.
Welcome back to another episode of the Loadout Music Podcast. I am your mildly under the weather host, Aaron Perlut. And today we are joined by Ed Jurdi and Gordy Quist of the Band of Heathens, who have a tremendous new record out. Guys, really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Our pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So you guys used to kind of, you were founded, you were kind of knocking around Austin, and the two of you and Colin Brooks were just kind of playing out on different stages and kind of came together. It's seemingly, and this is back in like, I guess, 05 or so, but in a very organic way where y'all used to just play together at open mic type gigs. Is that how you originally came together?
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, that is it. There was another songwriter named Brian Keen when we kind of first came together in the fall of 2005. But yeah, I mean, that clocks it pretty well. I mean, basically how it went was each of us had a residency at this club called Momo's. And but there was always a lot of interplay and, kind of jamming with each other, that sort of thing. It was always kind of, the night had a kind of a loose feel. There was a good vibe of friendship, amongst all the guys playing. So at a certain point, someone came up with the idea of, hey, what if we all just sort of pass the ball around singing songs and we share the same rhythm section, the same bass player and drummer. So rather than us all losing money, a bunch of it, we'll each just lose a little bit of money now. And we just thought it would be fun. Honestly, it was kind of a lark. There really wasn't there was no master plan. There was no idea of this going on for, not even weeks, honestly. It just started as an experiment like that. And we immediately had a lot of fun with it. And it immediately started resonating with people. I think first other musicians, people would come down and sit in, people like Guy Forsyth and Patrice Pike. And, there's a lot of great musicians in Austin at the time. And then the music community, which is really hip in Austin, they kind of caught onto it too. It almost kind of became like a little insider hang, for people that were really big music fans. They could come down on Wednesday night and kind of see stuff that might not happen ever again, most likely. That was kind of the mantra, like, let's make sure something happens this week that will never happen again. And usually that entailed never rehearsing any of the songs that we played, people throwing cover songs and new songs of theirs out on the band unannounced. So it was just really loose and fun. It was kind of like, and the stage was an extended hang to the audience. There wasn't really a line between the audience and the stage. So I think that's kind of what kind of made it immediately resonate with people.
I would add to that, we specialized in tequila and trainwrecks, and it was a good time for cutting our teeth on danger and taking chances with music and kind of experiencing the magic that comes from that.
And is that, I read somewhere that originally there was this kind of name you guys had put together called the Good Time Supper Club. Was that what that was? Like, just, tight musicians, friends coming together, Good Time Supper Club, and almost like deep audience engagement on this? Yeah,
it wasn't even really, it was kind of the name of the night or the name of the jam. It was like the Good Time Supper. It wasn't even really a band name, but we didn't really have a name. It was just, the Good Time Supper Club. And that's what we called it. And then one day in the newspaper, the Heathens were listed. And it was like, are we double booked? Like, who are the Heathens? And we show up and we were the Heathens, and someone started calling us the Heathens, and there are some suspicions on who that may have been. But the band name kind of came kind of by accident, and unintentionally, ended up being called the Heathens, I think, out of some of maybe the behavior of those shows.
How long did it take until you guys said, okay, this is something beyond just kind of jam night with the boys? This is something we're gonna make for real. We're going to build on this and then actually try to see how far we can take it?
Well, I think there were like a few levels of that. The first thing that occurred to us was to record a live show, because I think the discussion was kind of like, we don't really know how long this is going to go on for, but this has gotten really cool and it's really fun. So we should document it and have a recording. I want to say that's about 6 months into it. And that was that. From there, I want to say it probably took about maybe like 15 to 18 months. And that sort of is the point where like people left the project, and it kind of galvanized, you know what I mean? Because I think, like I said, the original intention wasn't for this to kind of take over. Everybody was pretty content with having a solo career and forwarding themselves in that capacity, So I think when, myself and Gordy and a few of the other guys at the time were like, hey, like, this is really good. We should really put some effort and energy into this and see where it leads to. That caused some of a few of the original guys from that Good Time Supper Club to kind of decide, hey, this isn't really what I want to be doing. And that was cool. I would say, what do you think, Gordy? That's about 15 months. I'd say like the beginning of 2007 sometime, somewhere in there,
Somewhere in there. It's a little hazy, but seems about right.
It was the tequila. It had to be.
There were other things too, but
Yeah.
those aren't allowed in every state yet. So I think the podcast is going out too.
Yeah. Well, live for Momo's, that was that first recording you guys did, right? I mean, that was kind of like, hey, our entry onto the stage. And I mean, that was really well received because, I mean, it wasn't just an Austin thing. It went beyond Austin and you guys started to get some notoriety based on that recording, right?
I don't know if it was based on that recording. I think that recording became kind of our calling card. It was what people could take home with them at the time. I think the live show was the thing that, I mean, people were coming to see the magic and the train wrecks and kind of the fun that we were having. And we started, I think a few things happened that we made that live album. Then we were approached by a TV station here in town to make another live album that they were going to do video and do a DVD for. So
that was live at Antone's, right?
That's live at Antone. So we had 2 live albums before we had even gone in the studio to make a record of original material. And so as a band, we had all made solo stuff before. But I think around that time, there were some Austin Music Awards and we won Best New Band. And all of that stuff was really helpful for us when hey, let's take this on the road. Let's get out of Austin and try going to Colorado and see what happens. And so I think the buzz that was happening locally in Austin was really helpful for us, getting out on the road and trying to build something nationally and eventually going to Europe probably a dozen times. And just, the community in Austin is, it's really great. And it's competitive artistically, but not in a threatening. Everybody wants to see everybody succeed and wants to collaborate. And I think that this band was kind of a natural kind of little microcosm of that community. And it was kind of like our chance to export a little taste of Austin, and take it on the road.
When you got that the Best New Band notoriety, I would imagine it's one of those things where you're like, well, in a rock and roll sense, it's really not too cool to be publicly excited about being called Best New Band. But I would imagine somewhere deep inside, you're like, this is pretty cool. I mean, there's so many good musicians in Austin, so many good musicians everywhere. And for someone to call you Best New Band, I mean, I would imagine, at least on the inside, it makes you feel like, okay, somebody likes us. We're doing something right. Clearly, we're on a path here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was exciting. I mean, everything was very new at that point too. You know what I mean? So we were sort of sharing in all these experiences together. And I think we couldn't help but feel like to Gordy's point, that the fact that we won Best New Band was really a nice reflection of Austin and the scene and the collaborative nature of things, and also like all the other bands that were nominated were really great bands. So, I mean, the scene was very fertile and there was so much great music going on. So to sort of be recognized in a class like that, it was certainly gratifying. And I think a lot of people worked really hard on making that happen. So it was a good kind of springboard for the band.
So the next thing for you guys And I took particular note of this because I believe that Ray Wiley Hubbard is the greatest songwriter in human history. But you go into the studio to finally cut your self-titled first album, and Ray ends up producing your first record. That must have been fantastic, but also a little nerve-wracking to have someone like him, such a good songwriter, end up being your producer of the first record.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Ray is a legend, and he's a great guy. He's also he took us under his wing and kind of wanted to like do, hey, let me show you how to make a record, and he specializes in vibe and cool, and that's, yeah, it was great. Certainly once you get to know Ray, he's really funny. He knows how to break tension in the studio. I remember one particular moment when there was an argument, or there was something, a heated discussion about how something should be recorded was happening, and all of a sudden Ray reaches in his pocket and he pulls out a huge switchblade and pops it open, and the whole room gets silent. And he just walks over to a carton of water, bottled water, and he just uses his knife to cut open the bottled water, plastic, and then he gets a water and puts his knife away and takes it. He has a beautiful way of reading the room and using humor to get very serious things across. Like he's a funny guy, but he's also like he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to get what he wants. And, yeah, it was a great experience, and it was an honor to have Ray be interested in the band. And he connected us with George Reef, who ended up mixing that record. And then George ended up producing some records for us and kind of became a mentor in the studio for us as well.
Yeah. Ray was on the show last season, and, as a singer and songwriter, he is my kind of North Star for songwriting. And so you're right. He is very funny. He's a brilliant guy. And he uses that wit, even in his songwriting, he uses it in a very purposeful way. And it's extremely intentional. And yeah, I think the world of him. So what was that experience like? And you're right. He's got this kind of cool vibe going on, but having done the, 2 live albums, then you're actually going into a studio and starting to produce something like that. That must have been a dramatic change, as you're transferring, all that energy you created on a live stage into the studio.
Well, yes and no. I think to your point about Ray, like Ray is incredibly disarming, so he has all these tools and all this ability, but it's not like he's flexing that, or he ever made us feel like, we were inferior to him or anything like that. He was certainly like in control of the proceedings, but I think also Ray's vibe fit really well with what we had been doing in the live sense, and and I think he wanted to kind of bring that to the record and capture that, but sort of just, not sand the edges off it, but kind of find ways to accentuate the energy and the electricity of what was happening in the live show, but just make it sound better, capture the sounds in a way that were cooler. And he could sort of, kind of craft this sort of sonic narrative, I think, in a way with kind of how the band was recorded and the songs we ended up putting on that record, so I think it was just really a natural fit. It was very easy. There wasn't really, there wasn't a whole lot of hemming and hawing about anything. I think he had ideas, he'd express them, we'd execute them, or we talk about an idea before we worked on it. But I mean, once we got on the floor and the tape started rolling, I mean, everything happened pretty quickly on that record, and the record is very live. I mean, we, like all of our records, I mean, we're always in the same room recording. But if my recollection of that record is correct, I want to say we did that in like 7 or 8 days, the whole thing. And it was almost entirely live. So.
And of course you had the song Jackson Station that came off that, which, I mean, it kind of made its way around the country and became kind of a hit for you guys. So, I mean, it's, it's always exciting when your early work, you start to get people saying, these guys can play. And I mean, the response to that record was pretty great.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jackson Station was the first song that Ed and I wrote together, the first like real collaboration on a songwriting front. And I think I think I don't, it happened pretty quickly, and there was a spark of something there that we both realized was that we enjoyed writing together, and we were better together than we were individually, and yeah, I think and at that point with that record, trying to get the songs, sometimes they take on a life of their own and they make their way around the country, and sometimes you're packed in a van trying to bring them around the country on your back, and that's kind of what we did, pretty hardcore for a long time.
Yeah, I don't think for people who love music but have never played and been on the road, I mean, I just went through this for the past week. They don't understand how humbling the road can be. I mean, you're packed in a van. We were packed in a truck towing a U-Haul with our gear, and it's it's not the sexiest thing. You get to the stops, and the best part is you just get up on stage and just start going and forget about the 500-mile drive you just made from stop 1 to stop 2 or what have you, and the lack of sleep you got. But you guys, I mean, it seems like you're very, very busy. So after your first record, you guys go and do I think it was like a live Blue Rose Christmas Party Germany record, and then a year later, you've got One Foot in the Ether that's done. I mean, it seems like there's a continuum of churn for the band.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't really stopped, honestly. I mean, I think public facing, sometimes it might seem like it's more busy than other times, but I mean, I think that's really an outgrowth of the fact that we're always like very creatively hungry, to keep writing music and making new records. And that's no exception. I mean, the only difference I think between maybe then and what's happening now is that we probably were doing twice as many dates as we are now. I wouldn't say we're doing half the work that we did then, but just as far as traveling, we're fewer dates on the road. But I mean, that record was basically like we wrote and road tested that record before we had gone in the studio. Really, we were playing there's like 12 songs on that record. I think we were probably playing like 9 or 10 of them live before we went into the studio. So similar to the first record, we hit that one really hot, and that record's very live as well. A couple of the songs on that record are just to take vocals and everything live. So, I mean, yeah, we were really feeling it. And I think we really had felt like the band really had grown a lot from the self-titled record to One Foot in the Ether, and kind of had started finding our footing more as a rock and roll band, which is, I kind of think, where most of us were coming from, as opposed to, I think the first record leans a little bit more country, but country rock, I guess, for lack of a better term. But
Oh.
I do feel like we kind of started finding our sound a little bit more on One Foot in the Ether. There's more harmony on that record. It's a little bit heavier. The groove is a little bit deeper on that. And I think, that was just kind of a product of all the collective growth and experience we'd had, working with Ray Wiley, doing 200 plus shows, 300 shows in the year and a half between the records. All those things kind of contributed to, I think, to the songs and to the way the record sounds.
Yeah, somebody once said to me, they were talking about their first record versus the second. They said, yeah, we had 10 years of basically playing this first record out as we were building this band. And then the second record comes out, and, that might be a year later. And so sometimes it's a record company that's doing it. Sometimes it's your own inner time clock that's saying, we're really hot now. People love this. We got to get going on another record. And you don't have that same kind of window. And it must have put a lot of pressure on you, because the first record was so well received, to feel like we got to follow this up with something.
I think we always feel that pressure. If a record is well received or not well received, you feel the pressure to make another one. And I think more as writers, I feel the pressure more as a writer than as a band, because nowadays our last I mean, I don't remember if we road tested any of Top Hat Crown, our third record, but the first two albums we road tested all those songs. And at a certain point, certainly from Sunday Morning Record, our fourth album on, the band doesn't hear the songs until the day we hit the studio. So Ed and I write and we share ideas with each other, and we're kind of doing pre-production with each other in our writing process. And that's where I feel the pressure of like, okay, we got to be back in the studio in 6 months or in 3 months. And so there's that pressure to have songs. I mean, songs are the most valuable currency that a musician can have. And so, so for us, that's definitely, that pressure is always there, and it's kind of self-imposed, I think, because we want to keep doing this, and you got to you're only as good as your last work, you know?
Yeah. That's interesting that the rest of the band doesn't typically hear it until you get in the studio, because that then, puts the onus on them to really be able to, I mean, it demonstrates the quality of the musicianship you guys surround yourself with as well, to be able to really make something sing during that week or 2 or 3, however long you're in the studio for. So, and I got to say, LA County Blues, which is on that One Foot in the Ether, that is my favorite Band of Heathens song personally, but you guys have a pretty long list of great songs. And I mean, the next record you mentioned, Top Hat Crown, that had Hurricane on it, which became a really big hit for you guys. It's just such a unique song and tells such a kind of a cool, dark story to a degree. But it ended up being a really terrific record for you guys. That was like 2011, I want to say.
Yeah, and it's funny because Gordy and I have talked about this quite a bit. I think when that record came out, a lot of people were like, I don't know if we can curse on here or not, but
Please do.
They were like, what the fuck is going, what are a couple of these songs, like, what are you guys doing? And I think again, like there was a lot of growth in that record too. There was sort of like some, push towards some psychedelia, which we had all kind of started getting into a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
I think just some kind of larger and grander scope type pieces, some different instrumentation. Again, like just kind of taking the tools we had learned and incorporating it into the presentation of the songs. Like Gordy mentioned, there's kind of like the writing of the songs, which is one thing, and then there's kind of the recording of the songs. And I think by the time we get to Top Hat Crown, it was kind of just like, well, we're going to kind of throw out all the rules. And that was the first record that George Reef produced for us. And I think George also had an idea about what he wanted to do and some ways he wanted to steer stuff. So he was a big influence in the way that record sounds, for sure. And, I think that's really the first record where we kind of started to, I think like we all knew the power of the studio and the things you can do in the studio sonically, but I think that's the first record where we began to actually realize it. Like there's a sort of disconnect between like what you understand intellectually and what you can actually put into practice. And I feel like Top Hat Crown is a record where we were able to kind of start to put some of the things we had learned into practical use. You know what I mean? And there's a bunch of different examples on that record, from, having a horn section on the other Broadway to, backwards tape loop swirling sounds to triple tracked acoustic guitars, all kinds of stuff that's very kind of inside baseball stuff. So I don't usually want to bore people with that too much, but from the musician's perspective, stuff that's kind of just, it's exciting and it's fun to sort of to mess around with and experiment.
Yeah, I mean, you had songs on that record like Medicine Man and Should Have Known and Polaroid, and you mentioned the other Broadway. And it definitely does. You could feel kind of the expansion of the band. And I think, sometimes there's a sense of boredom that creeps in where you're like, we really need to experiment. But then you've got the onus of the fan base you've built up that's got expectations of what you had. I remember the Black Crowes went through this with Amorica. They had these first 2 albums, which were just kind of rock and roll records. And then Amorica comes out and it's like, what the fuck is this thing? And I know it took me like 5 listens to kind of feel like, okay, now I'm starting to get this. I can feel this. But there is, like, in songwriting, at least I find at some point you're like, all right, we got to change this up a little bit. There needs to be some evolution of the sound.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that record was definitely the band artistically pulling one direction. And it was the last record we did with that lineup of the band, actually.
Right.
There was definitely tension, artistically. And I think that can be a really good thing, actually, I think. But it's interesting the shift that we were feeling artistically, that when we made that record, like Ed said, it was not well received at first. It was like, what the hell are these guys? This doesn't sound anything like what the last two records.
Yeah.
And what are they doing? And I think it's funny now. You mentioned, it's a popular record. It was like a slow burn. I mean, nothing.
Yeah.
And that was it was years in the making of people discovering that record, and even the song Hurricane. It was like a last minute add on, because the record we were like, well, we've got this Gulf Coast theme going on in a lot of the writing. We've got songs about the oil spill in the Gulf. We've got songs about Marie Laveau in New Orleans, and I think that for that reason, we were like, well, let's put this song on here. And it was deep in the record. And I don't know, that record's kind of an interesting one, where we were just kind of following the muse, making something we thought was cool. It actually wasn't well received when it first came out. And
Right.
Fortunately, over time, I think people have discovered it and maybe are enjoying what we were going after. But, each record you make is kind of a reaction to the one you made before. And that's the fun of being in a band and making records.
And in retrospect too, it's sort of like that record to me, when I listen to it, it's kind of the sound of the original band breaking up, and the sound of what the band was going to become, really Gordy and I forging an alliance together. Because I think what also ended up happening, it was sort of like, there's kind of an endurance game with being in the studio and doing this work. And at the end of the sessions, it was always like, it was me and him working on stuff. You know what I mean? So it just kind of became apparent. And that's not a slight to anyone. That's just sort of like, this is just kind of like, this was a group dynamic, and this is kind of what started happening, and Trevor, our keyboard player, who's still with us today, like that was the first record where I feel like he was certainly more involved and had, a larger imprint on what the sound of the band was going to become. So it's interesting, like there's certainly no awareness of that in the moment when it's happening.
Yeah.
But when you look back on stuff, you're like, oh, it all makes sense. You know what I mean? These things kind of like, and like if music is a reflection of your life and what's going on, that album is a reflection of kind of what was going on in the band at the time, where there was definitely like, there was artistic tension, but there was like tension too, so, and like, that's just how it works itself out sometimes, and in the end, it's all been good, but it took a few years to get a little perspective on that, I think.
Yeah. Cause I mean, you did the Double Down record after that, the live record from Denver, but that's when Colin left the band, I guess, after that was recorded at the very least. And I feel you be on kind of that tension, and because I don't think whether it's a company or a basketball team or a band, chemistry is everything in my mind. I mean, chemistry is so important. And if you're having a lot of tension, chemistry just evaporates. But even, Ed, you mentioned perspective after a few years. It must have been difficult, particularly when Colin left, or maybe it was a breath of fresh air at the time, just because the three of you guys had kind of founded the band together. Was that tough when he just walked away, or was it kind of like, we all get it, this got to happen, this is just not working anymore?
Well, I think some of both, to be honest with you. I think you mentioned the Double Down, and I feel like the band in that incarnation had really reached a peak. Like, we had Trevor was touring with us at that point, so we're kind of a 6-piece band. And I actually love the Double Down because I think it's a great document of that band at its best. And I think we really like, the band was really peaking and becoming really great live at that point, I think. But I think, to your point, and for a lot of reasons, it just became a situation that wasn't tenable anymore. Like, I I don't want to say that it came out of nowhere, because I think it was building for a while. But again, the difference between having an understanding of what's going on and then it actually happening and dealing with it are two very different things. Maybe Gordy can talk a little bit about the aftermath of that, but there certainly were a lot of discussions. I think I will say this from my perspective: the remaining guys at the time, I think we're all intent on continuing on. The question was just what that was going to look like, what we're going to call it, like how are we going to move forward with this? Because we all want to move forward, but what's the best way to do that?
And I would just add, I think a lot of the tension came from the work ethic and the drive. We were pounding the road. I mean, I don't know how many shows we were probably doing 240 shows a year for a couple years in a row, and I think that's why the band was so good. That's why Ed mentioned, like, that was kind of the best that version of the band had sounded. But the flip side to that is, like, there's a cost and there's a toll to doing it, and it's hard. I mean, we had been a band for 6 or 7 years at that point and had been hitting it really hard. And so I think for some of the guys, it was too much. And, life is more than being in a band and touring all the time. And I think that if you're not happy doing that, then you got to look around. And that's kind of like where, there were tension from a lot of reasons. There was tension, but ultimately I think the reason it imploded was we just were working too much. And I think some of us thrived off of that. Some of us enjoyed that, but then at a certain point, you get burned out. And so, the band sounded really good at the time, but it's hard work getting to that point as a band. And afterwards, like Ed said, it was a question of, like, all right, Trevor and Ed and myself, do we want to keep doing this? It was unanimous yes. Okay, then it was like, all right, is this still the Band of Heathens, or is it a different band? What is this? And we looked around and felt like the soul of what we were doing was kind of still intact, and it was still felt like the Band of Heathens to us. And here we are.
It seems like after that point, I don't know if this was purposeful or maybe, to your point, Gordy, about 240 shows or 240 nights in a year, which is remarkable. Maybe you guys felt like you needed to start stretching things out, because I know, the following year in 2013, you did Sunday Morning Record, but then it wasn't until, 3 years later, 2016, when Duende came out, which was your 5th album. But was there a conscious choice at that point, like, we need to space some things out and maybe put less stress on us as individuals and as a band, or was it just the way things went?
It wasn't a conscious decision. Duende was delayed. Actually, Duende was finished actually well before it came out. I think we switched management and ended up kind of shopping around for the team. We've released every record on our own. We've been independent the whole time for 17 years. And that means we're hiring publicists and radio people, and we have great management to kind of help quarterback that effort. But we're a label kind of running things on our own, essentially, and outsourcing the experts in each of their fields. So I remember Duende, I think, was delayed because we put out an EP maybe ahead of time, the Greengrass EP, which I don't think came out digitally, but we put out an EP and then put out the record, and the EP was just buying time because the people we wanted to work the record, their date that it fit into the machine for them was a little bit down the road. Isn't that how it went, Ed? Does that sound right?
It was delayed like a full year. That record was done like the end of 2015, I think, and it didn't end up coming out till the beginning of 2017. So, yeah.
So then in the meantime, and we recorded like 20 something songs for that record in
Yeah.
a handful of different studios across the country, from Asheville, Nashville, Austin. And then we had all these songs, and we ended up going back in with our buddy Jim Ballantyne. And we're like, Jim, help us pick which songs need to go on the record, because we could make 3 different records depending on which songs we make, which songs we take from this. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a fun record to make. But we spent a lot of time on it, and then we spent a lot of time on kind of building the team to release it. So,
yeah. And then, I always find your record that came out in 2018, A Message from the People Revisited, the song Heaven Help Us All. I find that to be a really fascinating song for some reason, just because it's, the instrumentation has this joyfulness about it. And it's, it just, I find it to be a very unique song in your catalog. Just because, it's fun. It's, and not that you guys have a track record of writing morose songs, because that's not the case at all, but there's something very unique about that song within your catalog that just really stands out for me. Can you talk a little bit about writing that song and kind of when you're thinking about like laying the instrumentation down, how it came to be?
Well, actually, that whole record, A Message from the People Revisited, is a remake of a Ray Charles record, start to finish. And so, we had fallen in love with this Ray Charles record from 1972 that was out of print. It wasn't on any of the streaming services at the time. And we found it on vinyl, and everyone in the band fell in love with it. And we had this idea to re-record it. And then simultaneously, our buddy George Reef, who Ray Wiley Hubbard had introduced us to, and he had produced the previous 2 records, or a couple of records before that, but he passed away in 2017. And I ended up kind of taking over his studio space. And before we figured out the details of how that was going to work, whether it was just like moving his gear somewhere else or keeping it in the same building, I asked his brother if we could rent the building out for a month before we tore the gear out. And he said yes, and that was kind of our excuse to make that record. We're like, hey, we have a month, and we were calling all our artist friends to come and make records and record for a month, trying to make the most of it. And so I think we had like 4 days, and we all learned those songs from that record, and we just went in. And so the instrumentation for that record, it was this dance of how much do we turn these songs on their head and make them nothing like the original versions. And then some of them were just like kind of first instinct recreations of the original kind of sound of those recordings. And that song, I think maybe what you're getting at is it has the light and the dark. It's heavy, heavy subject matter, but it sounds joyful. And that record to me is kind of the perfect marrying of those 2 things. It's a critique of America in 1972 from a civil rights standpoint, but it's also a celebration of the country. That record has, John Denver's Country Roads Take Me Home. It also has America the Beautiful on it. And then it also has these heavy, songs that are critiquing like things that need to be better. And we felt like that was a message that was still kind of resonating. And so that's kind of the beauty, I think, of that record, is it has both the celebration. That's the beauty of our country. We have free speech. We can critique. We can say, hey, you know what? We can do better than this. But it doesn't, we still have a lot to be grateful for,
So I think the important message here is that is, as much as I try not to seem like an imbecile, I am. When the rubber hits the road, I'm an imbecile. So there you have it.
Feel the same way.
A lot of records, Aaron. I mean, if that's as bad as it gets. We're in good shape here today.
No, I do a good job making an idiot of myself when I put my mind to it. So let's jump into the new record, guys. I don't want to we don't need to go through every single record in your catalog, because I'm sure you guys get tired of talking about history. I think the most important thing, though, about this record, at least the publicity pictures, what's up with the jumpsuit? This jumpsuit that's in the publicity picture. What is this? Are you trying to say I want to be a pilot? What's going on here?
Should there be a really cool story to this, or should there just be the real story of what actually happened?
I want just the real story.
So when you do this, when we did a photo shoot, right? That's what happened, and we had this wonderful photographer, Elise Gafshin, and this wonderful woman, Sarah Dinkin, she did wardrobe, and she said, "Hey, you'd look really good wearing this." And when a beautiful woman tells you that you look really good wearing something, you don't question it, you put it on. I said, "Okay, Sarah, you got it." And I think it looks good. If I can compliment myself, it was a nice yin and yang to Gordy's all white outfit, if I'm thinking of the right picture there. And I think that's kind of what she was getting at with some of the clothing for the shoot. Was we had, all that, like, I think Gordy and I kind of were offset from each other with a lot of stuff in a cool way, which I think is good, because that kind of represents the band. There's like, mostly it's all come together, but like a lot of that's defined by our, kind of each of our personalities, you know what I mean? And I think the nexus point of the band is where we come together and figure out how to make things work. So that's sort of that's the visual representation of the Band of Heathens. It's the Oreo cookie of the Band of Heathens.
Yeah. Now Gordy looks remarkably adult in the publicity photos.
He's the adult in the band. Yeah. There's no doubt about it.
Very, very adult. But I love the jumpsuit too, man. I'm down.
We have a history of jumpsuits. We did during the pandemic, our first shows back, and some of our live streaming. We had some friends of ours in San Antonio. They make really great clothing, and they like chain stitch patches, and they got us all jumpsuits with psychedelic patches all over them. And so we did some touring in the whole band in jumpsuits, and I guess the look stuck with Ed. He looks the best in the jumpsuit.
And just to give them a shout out, that's Richter Goods and Lunchroom Anxiety. Wonderful clothing.
Richter Goods.
Yeah.
Right on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the album. It's a terrific record. I mean, I really enjoyed Simple Things as just kind of a piano driven ballad. I thought Heartless Year was a really interesting tune in that it took me back to Mary Chapin Carpenter in kind of her during that time in the 90s when she was at all her power. I think it was more the guitar work in it, but it just from end to end, it's a really diverse album. It's a terrific record, and I'd love to talk a little bit about writing the record and recording the record and kind of what went into it.
Well, I think it's a record that speaks to perseverance, and kind of like it's a survival record. It's all of us coming out of a crazy time where we had to kind of take a step back, slow down, and take stock of what's important in our life. And as a band, it's our work is unique in that everybody's work was disrupted during that time, but a lot of people could still work from home and keep doing things. We really couldn't do any of what we have been doing for most of our adult life. So it was like a reset button for us. And in a really good, healthy way, I think we found fulfillment in the simple things. Honestly, like it kind of says it all. And that's where a lot of the songs came from. And I also think it was the band finding the joy in actually getting back out on the road and getting back in the studio and getting to play together again. For me, there's a lot of joy in the record. Yeah,
I particularly liked I liked the honky tonk feel of I Got the Time. It just it's a terrific tune. It's got a great drive to it. But I do love the diversity on it. I mean, it's a unique, to me at least, it seemed like a unique collection of songs.
Well, that's what we're always shooting for. And I think I Got the Time kind of encapsulates what you're talking about really well. You know, there is kind of a heaviness, I think, on a lot of this, because there really is, there is like a story of survival and perseverance, you know, but there's also the idea of celebrating in the face of these things. You know what I mean? You know, when you're even when things are tough and you're down, you got to find little rays of sunlight, for lack of a better cliche at this moment, where you can take stock of things and enjoy them despite the hardship you might be kind of going through, you know. And that's rock and roll in a nutshell. To me, that's sort of that's why it's such a great art form and a great form of expression, you know.
Right on. Well, it's a terrific album, and I imagine you guys I know you're separate places now, but I imagine you're going to be hitting the road soon to support this.
Yeah, I think the tour starts in April, and that'll be the first leg of it, and there'll be a couple more legs later on this year, a bunch of festivals and travel dates this summer. So yeah, we'll hopefully be coming. I know you're in St. Louis, so hopefully, I think we'll be coming there later this year, but we'll be coming pretty much everywhere that they'll have us.
Everywhere you want to be. Well, Ed, Jurdi, Gordy Quist, Band of Heathens, thank you so much for being on the Loadout. It's been a real pleasure having you on, and just really appreciate your time, and best of luck promoting the album and just playing out. And you know, 17 years later, I guess it's pretty amazing. You guys are still together as a unit, still you know, going down that path.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, guys. Take care.